Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Okay. We're ready now. Good morning, everybody. This is the Wieser Podcast. I'm Jim Wieser, who, believe it or not, the podcast is named after. And we're gonna do something a little different today. This is our first shot at it, and I am really looking forward to this. This is really going to be exciting. Um, uh, but I'd like to refer back to my last podcast just briefly on one matter that's of real significance to us. When I say us, those of us here in Northwest Indiana, particularly in Lake County, relative to the enforced redistricting in which the administration, the national administration, is engaged. You may recall that I said last week, watch what's going to happen. J.D. Vance is going to come back to Indiana where he's already been, and he isn't coming back to give out roses and candy. He's coming back to twist arms. And he came back this weekend and twisted the arms. And of those Republicans, and there are many, in my opinion, that are undecided in the legislature, because I know deep down most of them believe this is not an appropriate thing to do. I mean, come on, folks. We redistricted in 2022. That was 3 years ago. How much has changed? How much has the population shifted? How much do borders and boundaries need to be shifted over a 3-year period? That's why we do it routinely every 10 years after the census. But as you know, it's the Trump way, which is in Texas, get me five congressmen. In Georgia, it was find me 11,000, whatever it was, 780 votes. That's how it is. And they do it out of fear and by strong-arming people, and that's what they're doing in this state right now, where we have 9 congressional seats, 2 of which are Democrat, 7 of which are Republican. The Republican Party controls the entire state, but yet, this is what they feel they have to do. Why? Is it the right thing to do? Is there a necessity, a need to do it? Hell no. They're doing it because they can do it. They're doing it because they can strong arm. And I'll leave you with the last point that I made last week, which is our governor said in an interview that, well, I don't know, I'm going to leave it up to the legislature, but, you know, they have to take into account if we don't do it, you know what could happen. He said, oh, you know, there's dollars and there's money that could come here, and, you know, the president's not going to be happy, and we might not see the expected funding for programs here in Indiana from the federal government. It's a sad, sad way for government to work and to operate. And I have somebody here that might be commenting on that. And what I'd like to do is take this opportunity to introduce my guest, my friend of many, many, many years, a gentleman I grew up across the street with. What do you think, Bob? 2 or 3 blocks from here, maybe?
Not far from
3
here.
blocks
right?
from here on Ridgeland Avenue in Hammond. And let me just set the table real quick before I formally introduce my guest, Bob Blamire. I've thought about and know people and have friends, fortunately, who have done some remarkable things in their careers that relate to government and politics. And that's what this show is about. My show is about trying to explain how I, with my background as an elected official and a party chairman and someone who studied this in school and in my legal profession, I wanted to bring this to the folks here, that this isn't something that's just academic. This isn't something that's just ethereal out there in the universe, politics and government. It has its origin in many respects with folks who grew up here, who went to our schools, public or private, went to our schools, educated here, and then went on to do some pretty interesting and remarkable things in politics and government, most of whom you all won't know. And I thought it was a great idea, and I still think it's a great idea. We'll find out to introduce that to you and to get your feedback on what you think about doing this on occasion. So, having laid that groundwork, I want to introduce to you my dear friend. I don't want to say my oldest friend because then he's going to say, no, I'm really younger than you. And
You're asking for it.
Well, I know. But longest known friend, and have him, and we'll get into a little discussion here about things that he has done, which I believe to be an incredibly remarkable career, and it hasn't ended by any stretch. And so at this time, I'd like to introduce to you Bob Lamar. Bob, how are you?
Thank you, Jim. And it is true. I mean, nobody has been a friend of mine longer than you have. I think what's cool, this is about the same location where Carline House was.
Yes, it
is. A furniture store that sponsored our baseball team.
Our baseball team, yes.
Many moons ago.
Yeah, where Bob and I clearly did not star on it.
I particularly did not star on it, right. I did better as a coach with my dad. But, yeah, it was.
Yeah, Bob's dad was our coach. This was a team we played on during the summer. We were both
13 to 15-year-olds.
13 to 15-year-olds. Started at 8th grade as a 13-year-old. Went to high school. Bob's a Gavitt guy, so right here. I was a Bishop Knoll guy, that away, down north. But, Bob, you've been a busy dude.
Sometimes.
Why don't you, if you wouldn't mind, just Bob, we grew up together. Bob's dad was a fireman. I think assistant chief ultimately.
Yeah, he finished as assistant fire chief of Hammond, Indiana.
Yeah, and my dad was a meat cutter. Lived across the street from each other. Dear friends. Didn't agree on a damn thing.
Especially about baseball.
Especially about baseball. But they were dear friends, and Bob and I were dear friends. But so you're at Gavitt High School, and somehow, some way, you found your way to Washington D.C. Why don't you give the listeners a little background on that and how it happened?
Happy to. Well, I decided when I was very young that I wanted to be president of the United States. Like a lot of boys growing up in America, obviously girls at the time didn't think they were eligible, but I always thought, that's what I wanted to do. And I was president of my senior class in high school, like student politics, as well as theater and sports and everything, normal stuff. No one in my family had ever gone to college. And so we need to figure this out. And my mother had a lawyer friend she wanted to talk to about colleges, and she and I went, and he was talking about various universities. And when he mentioned the George Washington University in Washington, D.C., his description was, it's 3 blocks from the White House. And I said, I want to go there. And that literally was the end of my college search. I applied to GW, George Washington University, got in, and went there, as a freshman, 1967. The first day after my parents left me off in Washington, I took a bus down to the Senate to offer my 18 years of life experience to the junior senator from Indiana, a guy by the name of Birch Bayh. I'd never seen a senator before, much less knew one or met one. We had no politics in my family. No, political discussions almost never happened. I was a big Kennedy fan, so I liked the star aspect, the celebrity aspect of politics. In fact, if I had walked into Strom Thurmond's office or some right-winger and they offered me a job, I'd have probably gone there at the time. No political philosophy to speak of. But I had the good fortune of being able to meet him that day and told him I wanted to work for him. And within a matter of weeks, I got a call from a staff guy, and I can't even remember back how I gave him a phone number. Things like normal things like routine for us today. I must have written down the phone number of the phone in the hallway of the dormitory or something. Either way, I was invited to come down and do a volunteer project on weekends in the Senate. And the way I've often told the story is once I got there, I never left. So I ended up spending 13 years working in the office of Senator Birch Bayh. I knew who he was originally simply because my father at one point had gone with a bunch of firemen to Indianapolis to lobby on home rule. The home rule, local rule over firemen, policemen, and so on. And he had come back having met the Speaker of the House, Birch Bayh, who was a young, early 30s at the time, and was impressed. And that's all I knew. I didn't know anything else, but my mother had written a letter to Birch Bayh before I went, as well as to Senator Percy in Illinois, the two people whose names I guess resonated the most with her, certainly not with me at that point, asking for jobs, and both of them said, have me stop by and see him when I got there. And luckily I ended up not only going to the office of a man who would become a great United States Senator, but in my life, a great human being who had an enormous impact on my life.
I guess we all have great stories, oftentimes about how we got to where we wanted to go, and who we ultimately connected with. I just want to say, from my perspective, and I took a far different path. And it'll be interesting. Politics was never discussed in my house when I first told my folks.
In fact, I would be surprised if you said the opposite.
Yeah.
If you told me that.
Exactly. Yeah. It just wasn't what happened in those days. And it was sports and baseball and school and getting into trouble and stuff like that. And that's what it was, that's what it was really about. But when I came back after college, law school, and a stint in the United States Army, out of nowhere, I ran for public office when I was 27 years old. And everyone in my family was just stunned. No, they didn't even know. I couldn't tell you I couldn't tell you my parents' political affiliation in any. I had no idea. So that's just kind of the way we operated. But one thing I remember is I had the good fortune, my roommate from college lived in Silver Spring, Maryland. So I would go visit him. Both of his parents worked, well, his mom worked for National Geographic, but he worked for the Veterans Administration. His dad, they were in D.C. all the time because they lived right out. So I hooked up with Bob knowing he was over here, and I had the good fortune, this is when I was still in college, of personally meeting Senator Bayh. And that's one gentleman, and we're going to talk about him in a second. That's one person. I can't believe that when you left after having met him, that it didn't leave a lasting impression.
Yeah, well,
that was just who he was.
I would agree. It's interesting because people who are younger than us are more likely to remember Evan Bayh than Birch Bayh, because Evan became, of course, governor of the state and a senator. I babysat for Evan when he was 13 years old. I mean, it wasn't that he was a kid and I was an adult. He was 13, I was 19. I started with Birch when I was 18. First met Evan Bayh on election night, 1968, in Indianapolis. I honestly don't even know why I was in the hotel suite room. That I was a volunteer. I was a low-level nobody in the office. But some way I wangled myself into their suite watching the election returns, and was there when Lyndon Johnson called to congratulate him and Ted Kennedy called to congratulate him. And I remember Evan needed to go to bed, and his grandfather sat outside his door so no one would disturb him. And I met Marvella Bayh, Birch's wife, that night the first time too. So I just got lucky in a lot of ways, and they were very, very good to me. Where my life took a huge turn in the Birch Bayh world was after that election in 1968. I'm a sophomore in college. It was near the end of the first semester of sophomore year, and I'd come home back to Hammond for Christmas, and during the Christmas break, his secretary calls me and asks me, and this I've often described as a no-brainer of a question. She called me to ask me if I was interested in scheduling my classes around picking up the senator in the morning and taking him home at night, and I could keep his car. I was like, yeah.
That's a definite no-brainer.
And so, I mean, all I wanted to do was get to know this guy, spend time with him, and be in his presence. And we became, I became like the older brother of Evan and almost like a family member. So my relationship with him was more personal than professional early on. And we got along. We had Birch had tried out for the major leagues twice. Baseball he loved. I loved baseball. We talked baseball. I love politics. We talked politics, history, movies. And Marvella, his wife, took me to my first French restaurant for lunch one day. I couldn't believe it. At age 20, I'm 20 years old, and he turned me into a Redskins fan, football fan. We would go to Redskins games. One I'll never forget, I'm 20 years old. He calls George Allen, who was then the coach of the Redskins, for tickets. He gets 3 tickets in George Allen's box with Mrs. Allen, his son George Allen, a future senator. So here I am with a United States senator, 2 future senators, Evan and George Allen, Art Buchwald, the very famous columnist and humorist of the time, Edward Bennett Williams, the owner of the Redskins, and Chief Justice Earl Warren.
Oh, my God.
And I'm sitting eating a hot dog with Chief Justice Earl Warren, and I'm a 20-year-old nobody. I called my parents that night and said, "You're not going to believe what I did today." So those kinds of things, like,
but you know what?
were unbelievable.
Every once in a while, I have to ground Bob because of his background and remind him that the Redskins were the precursors to the Commanders, who I think were on TV last night, as I recall. And I believe it was the Chicago Bears.
I don't think I noticed that.
Beat them last night.
Oh, painful night.
So
that fumble.
Yeah. That's going to get into something we're going to talk about.
All right.
Unforced errors. You're with Birch. Unfortunately, in 1980, Birch's career as a senator came to an end after 3 terms, I believe. He was a 3-term senator.
18 years, yeah.
18 years. And you now have to go off in a different direction. But if you could, just real quickly, tell the listeners and remind them, in case they don't know, what Birch Bayh meant to our country in terms of what he did relative to our Constitution.
Oh, sure. I mean, I think that one of the reasons I wanted to write the book, his biography, is I felt this was a career that was worth writing about. I had a friend at the time say to me, "Why would you write a biography of Birch Bayh? No one knows who he is." And I got thinking about it, and rather than being offended, thinking, it's true that we don't know if somebody wasn't a nominee of a party for president or an actual president, they quickly fade from history. I mean, I think of all the senators I used to see on a daily basis that nobody knows who they are now. But history is not just made up of stories of kings and emperors. And presidents. It's also all of its component parts. And he represented a substantial component part, if I may. No one since the Founding Fathers has written more than one constitutional amendment except for Birch Bayh. He wrote 2. There have been 12,000 constitutional amendments introduced in the Congress during our history. 12,000. Since the Bill of Rights, only 17 have passed. He wrote 2 of them. That's substantial. That alone puts him in the Hall of Fame of legislators. Then you add to it impactful legislation like Title IX, which he wrote, which revolutionized the role of women in our society. People give it credit for women's sports, but it was really just about educational opportunities for women at the time. There were very few women in law schools or medical schools. And then Bayh-Dole legislation, which was sort of the end of his career, which changed the way patent law works, which allowed companies to sprout up who had been funded in part by federal money. But prior to Bayh-Dole, they weren't being brought to market because government reserved for itself the right to bring them to market. Bayh-Dole changed that, gave those rights back to the universities, small businesses, and so on that created these inventions, one of which is called Google. So
heard of it.
So his work in many ways has had a ripple effect throughout our society. things that have made those of us who were associated with him very proud. And I know it made him very proud. So that was one of the reasons, among the reasons that I felt telling his story was a worthwhile endeavor.
And that's what that is one of the primary reasons I wanted to have Bob here. It's great. One, because he's from here. His roots are here. But more importantly, he's made reference to it. Bob's done a lot of things in his career, very, very successful in the political world, whatever you would call. What do you call that stuff you did with numbers and things? Well, before we get on.
Shortly after we lost, I spent a year trying to fight the new right. I formed an organization. A lot of people in 1980 and a couple of years earlier, 78, were upset about the impact of the Moral Majority, the National Conservative Political Action Committee, a number of committees that sort of were revolutionizing hit politics, one-issue politics, and going after the liberals in Congress, and Birch was on the top of their list, and everybody always kept saying, somebody ought to do something, but nobody was doing anything, and so I wanted to be one to do anything, but it was very, very hard. I found it very hard to raise money. There were a lot of competing organizations at the time, and so I was doing my best to try to stay alive and keep the organization going when I ran into another former staffer who had been my boss within the office years earlier, who said to me, "Hey, I have a friend who was hired by the AFL-CIO to find computerized voter lists that they can match to their members to tell them who's registered to vote. Can you do that?" I said, "Sure." I had no idea how to do that. Nobody did. This is 1982. And I decided to talk to this guy about going to work for him. I did go to work for him. I had to abandon my political action committee because, number one, eating was becoming a factor in my life. I wanted to get married and have a family. I went to work for this company and started calling around the country do you have anything on computer? What's on it? What does it cost? What are the rules? There was no business doing this. And I was compiling these lists, keeping the information on a yellow pad. Yeah. And we had the rights to use the data after I would find the computerized voter list. I would send it to a computer house we were working with in Dallas, Texas. They would match it against the AFL-CIO's membership for that geography, and then they could tell the AFL could then communicate to them those who were registered to vote or to try to register those who were not. It was a very elementary process, but all of a sudden I would call a candidate and say, "I have a voter list. I can give you a phone list or a walk list that has just the Democrats, and it will have their ages on it, and it'll have phone numbers on it." And I had no problem with people saying, "I'll buy that." And I had to make up the pricing. There was no price list, no understanding of the economics. I made an enormous number of mistakes in the process, but I learned tons by making those mistakes. And we really kind of invented a business of compiling voter lists and using them for voter contact, for candidates and organizations to communicate to voters, to target. And I did that for the next 35 or so years.
I recall it well because
built the first Indiana voter file.
Yeah, that was what I was just going to say. He built the Indiana voter file for statewide for our state.
Wayne Townsend for governor, 1984.
Yeah, don't remind me because I remember that race. What much better 4 years later when we had Evan Bias, our candidate.
That's right.
And we'll talk about that in a second. So ultimately, what Bob did after all those many years in politics and government, and then finally getting married and finally having two wonderful sons, he did what he said he wanted to do. He met with folks. He did background, and he wrote the biography on Birch Bayh. I have it here. I've got the book right here. It's a prized possession of mine. And he wrote the biography of one of the most influential senators, in my opinion, in the history of the Senate. But certainly representing the state of Indiana, for which we can all be grateful and proud. Um, when you wrote the book and you had all this background and you knew the family as you've described, is there anything that and by the way, the book's been out for several years now.
6 years now.
6 years. Very successful. We had an incredible event, did we, at Wicker Park?
Yeah, great.
A book event 3-4 years ago, I would guess, something like that.
It was 2019.
Was it that long ago?
Yeah, it was 6 years ago.
Oh, my God.
Because then COVID came and all the
book that's right. It was right
stop.
before COVID. Great event. But is there anything that, two things that stand out in your mind as you read that book that maybe you didn't even know or you weren't aware or you thought it was more significant than you really thought at the time?
Oh, tons. There are a number of things. I mean, I knew obviously about the constitutional amendments and Title IX. I mean, in fact, he and let me go back to why I wrote the book and how that all came about. Birch and his wife Kitty were having dinner at our home about 20 years ago, at least 20 years ago. And after they leave, my then wife, turns to me and says, Kitty asked me whether you had ever considered writing Birch's biography. Now, this is easily 20 to 30 years after we lost. And I had my own company. And I called my wife's brother, who had written a number of books, and said, what do you think about that idea? And he said, well, you can't keep your day job and write a biography. I mean, I was working a lot during political season, and I wanted to get it done, but I called the senator and said that I'd been thinking about this and didn't think I could do it. And he said, I don't want you to do it. I'm going to do it. He said, people are telling me about software I could talk into and I want to write my own story. And I said, no, you're not. And he said, yeah, I am. I said, no, you're not. I said, we've been out of office now at this point, I think probably 30 years. I said, if you haven't done it by now, you're not going to do it. And so I thought about introducing him to other authors. And my brother-in-law actually set me up with a guy named Ted Widmer, who actually wrote a blurb for the book. Ted had worked with Clinton on his memoirs, had been a speechwriter in the White House for Bill Clinton. And I called Ted, and he said, I can't do it. I have a contract to write a biography of Martin Van Buren. He said, but I'd like to meet Birch Bayh. So I arranged a lunch, and the three of us have lunch. And I don't know how else to describe it except that Ted fell in love. He's calling me regularly. This has to happen. Somebody's got to do this. We got to get this written. And I still had not decided to do it. But one of the things I had done, Birch and I were out at some event with our sons, his son Chris and my son Nick, in Chestertown, Maryland. And I said to him, Senator, one of the best things I ever did in my life was I interviewed my parents on videotape over a period of 7 years. And now my dad's gone, and they're priceless. How about if I do that with you? He stood there for the longest time, looked at me and said, I'd be willing to do that. So we launched into this video interview process, and this was 2012. And during that period, we went through the 40th anniversary of Title IX, an impressive ceremony at the White House celebrating Birch. I met Billie Jean King there, who was walking around telling everybody how he was our hero. She ended up writing a blurb for the book as well, eventually. But while I was doing these interviews with him, and we did 30 hours of interviews over the ensuing 2.5 years, 12 sessions. In the middle of that, I got a contract from Indiana University Press to write the book. And so I started really just adjusting my life, trying to phase down the work life, because it's very hard to work full-time and write a biography. But I had the good fortune of interviewing Senators Orrin Hatch and Pat Leahy as part of this, Congressman Lee Hamilton, former Senator Lugar, Evan Bayh, a number of Bayh staffers. And yes, back to your question, I learned things I had no idea about. In 1978, a woman sued General Electric, her employer, for not giving her health benefits when she was pregnant. And the case ended up going all the way to the Supreme Court that ruled that General Electric was within their rights not to give her benefits because health benefits are designed for involuntary illness and pregnancy is voluntary. And Birch Bayh then wrote the Pregnancy Discrimination Act of 1978 that said because only women can be pregnant, discriminating against them is a violation of the Civil Rights Act, and therefore that is the law of the land to this day. Health benefits are given to pregnancy on the basis of pregnancy. So essentially, things like that I had no idea of. The Bayh-Dole legislation, the patent legislation, I had no idea of that.
Right.
Because I was in Indiana in 1980 for the campaign against Dan Quayle, that we ended up not winning. I hate to say losing, but we didn't win it. I had no idea about what was going on legislatively during 1980. That was not my priority. My priority was politics. But essentially, it was he always said he got involved in politics to make a difference. So from the time he ran for the legislature in Terre Haute in the 50s, he got involved in politics to make a difference. So originally the book was going to be called Making a Difference, The Life of Birch Bayh. The publisher said there are 200 books that begin with making a difference out there. And you want people to search for him. So you put his name first. He was delighted with the title. He read the first draft of the book. By this time, he was failing physically, not mentally, but physically. And he ended up dying about 6 weeks before my publication date.
Oh, no.
It was one of the great honors. In fact, my former publication date was the date of the Indianapolis State House memorial service they put together for him. And Lugar and Ruckelshaus, who he had beaten for the Senate, also died within that several-week period.
Right.
It was just amazing how all three of them died within a short period of time of each other.
So you could see how clever and smart Bob is, and he's always been that way. So he just twisted it around and put Birch Bayh, making a difference, instead of making a difference, Birch Bayh. See how talented he is. I mean, I've just got to tell you.
I really wrote it so I can get my picture in a book.
I
got
figured.
my pictures in there.
So we're going to move on here real quick. So because what made me think of it is your reference to Billie Jean King. He meets Billie Jean King. Now Bob he's gotten the writer's bug. He writes the book, and he goes on, and now he doesn't have all that distraction from a real job.
That's right.
And having to do all that. He's just got all the time in the world. So he wrote, and it's just been published. And I'm grateful to Bob, who brought me a copy of it. But he wrote a book called, the title is Unforced Errors. And until I read the title of the book, I always thought unforced errors was only something in tennis. You always hear, McEnroe lost the match, or whoever was playing, Djokovic lost the match because of unforced errors. Mm-hmm. And it's a really interesting, fascinating book about people who most of us know these people who are renowned for their abilities and their skills, former presidents and former heads of state and all of that. But this is about decisions they probably regret, and decisions that if they were to look back or had that opportunity, they probably wouldn't have done. So the first thing is unforced errors. How'd that happen?
Well, it's funny, is while I wrote the Bayh book, I was a little bit intimidated about the whole prospect of writing the book because I had not written a book. I knew I had the material. I knew the story, but I didn't know if I had the ability. And then at one point I just said, well, screw it. I can't do much about it. I can only do my best. So I enjoyed the process more than I expected to. And one day I was watching a documentary on the Kennedy-Nixon debates, which you and I would remember well. Of course, you were a lot older than I was.
Oh, yeah. So much older.
But I'm watching this, and I'm thinking while I'm watching it, why did Nixon do this? It was a terrible decision. There was no precedent for televised presidential debates. Right. This was the first. He was ahead. Eisenhower argued with him not to do it. He was arrogant. He thought he was going to end the campaign on that first debate, that the country would see him as a serious politician and Kennedy was a rich playboy. And instead, he turned Kennedy into a rock star and proceeded to lose the closest presidential election of the 20th century. So I thought this was a really bad decision. So how many other bad decisions can I come up with where somebody who, again, had, as you said, a great career, beautiful legacy for forever, but made a critically bad decision at some point in their career? And I ended up creating an outline of 25 bad decisions, going all the way back to John Adams and the Alien and Sedition Acts. I'm here, John Adams, one of the greatest of the founding fathers, who stands for democracy. And, he did so many great things, so many good decisions, but he supported a policy that imprisoned people for criticizing the president because he didn't like being criticized. He had a thin skin. But his legacy is tarnished as a result of that. And Ted Widmer, the guy I referred to earlier, I contacted Ted about this concept to see if he thought it made sense for a book. And he said 25 decisions is too many. I'd narrowed to you. And I then it had been suggested by another friend of mine that don't call it bad decision, call it unforced errors, which is a lot more clever than bad decisions. But I asked Ted, and he said, well, I would call it bad decisions, unforced errors, 15 bad decisions that changed American history. And that is what the title is.
And so that's how the title came out. And folks, I interrupt Bob here for a second, but think about it. He just made reference to John Adams, the first vice president, the second president that succeeded George Washington, and who made many, many good decisions. Brilliant man, a leader, one of our leading founding fathers, excuse me, who approved the Alien and Sedition Act. Now, folks, if the past isn't prologue, tell me, what are we going through right now? What are we going through right now?
Presidential retribution about his enemies.
Absolutely. And here it is. And history repeats itself. And here it is. And
nobody likes to be publicly criticized.
No.
But you don't enter this business. When you enter this business, you have to be willing to take it.
Yeah.
My oldest son is in the musical theater world. And I remember saying to him as he was entering it, don't do this unless you can take the criticism and also the failures of the audition process. And I think he probably never got better advice. I happen to think it was, to this day, as good advice. And he told me, I don't even tell you about the auditions I do, because most of them the answer is no. And it's accurate that if you can't take it, as Harry Truman said, if you can't stand the heat, stay out of the kitchen. Donald Trump doesn't seem to subscribe to that attitude. And John Adams obviously didn't like being criticized as well.
Exactly. So Bob ends up writing this current book, because it's out now, folks. I myself stopped at Barnes & Noble about 2 weeks ago, and they put me on the list. It hadn't been delivered yet,
right,
but it was on its way, and it's at Barnes & Noble. I'm sure it's at other bookstores in the area. You get it, I imagine, through Amazon, suppose?
Or Barnes & Noble online. Both of them have it online.
And I strongly urge you and recommend you that you get this book. It's entertaining. It's incisive. It's clever. And one quick example, because I want to get into something else before we, unfortunately, I'll have to leave you all. One, I was talking to Bob this morning, and I said, before I read this book, I said, there's an unforced error section on Thomas Platt. And I said, who the hell is Thomas Platt? Real quick.
Well, first of all, I didn't want to make it all presidents. I mean, four of the 15 are not presidents.
Correct.
And Thomas Platt is furthest from the other three from being a president. Thomas Platt was the boss of New York, the New York Republican Party at the turn of the 20th century. He was a senator at the time when senators were still appointed by legislatures rather than elected by the direct popular vote. And Thomas Platt didn't like Theodore Roosevelt, but he wanted Theodore Roosevelt to run when he was running for governor to make sure he was running as a Republican and not an independent. He needed his popularity because of the Rough Rider and the reputation he had. he was going to win for governor, and Platt wanted him to be the Republican nominee, which he was. Well, as soon as Theodore Roosevelt becomes governor, he starts to enact these reforms, these anti-business reforms, and Thomas Platt was a tool of business in many ways and hated these reforms. The child labor laws and the reduced work week and all kinds of things that Platt just hated. And the vice presidency at the time was considered the graveyard of politicians. No vice president had become president since Martin Van Buren.
Right.
And so the idea was here, Garrett Hobart, who'd been the vice president under William McKinley, had died during that first term. And Platt engineered the move of Theodore Roosevelt from the governorship of New York to the vice presidency under William McKinley. McKinley is reelected. Roosevelt's his vice president. And less than a year from then, William McKinley is assassinated and Theodore Roosevelt's president. So from the standpoint of Thomas Platt, that was a bad decision.
Ultimately for him, a very bad decision.
A very good decision for the country.
Yeah.
He was a dynamic, successful president in many ways. Probably enjoyed the presidency as much as any man until Bill Clinton, I would say, probably. But from Thomas Platt's standpoint, this was a terrible decision.
Yeah. So you get a flavor, as we've just talked about this, you get a flavor of what this book is about. And it's really entertaining because it makes you look at government and leadership from a different perspective. We're not saying these weren't good people, or we're not saying they weren't successful, or that they didn't have great careers. We're just saying, oops, there's times when you can't always make the right decision. You try, you can't, and it comes back to bite you. And
let me address one of the greatest presidents we had in terms of the impact on this country and society, Franklin Roosevelt. President, 4 terms elected, got us out of the Depression and World War II, an enormously successful president who stood for so many of the right things, but he supported the internment of Japanese Americans in World War II. We had more Italian Americans and German Americans in the country than we did Japanese Americans, but only the latter were imprisoned. They lost their homes, their businesses. Not a single evidence of any disloyal acts by Japanese Americans in the entire time this took place and prior to that. Yet the discrimination about what they went through was enormous. And I think when you read various Roosevelt biographers, Doris Kearns Goodwin, James McGregor Burns, others, they all say this was a terrible act, not only for the people involved, but for his legacy.
Right.
And that's what I try to say is, why is it a bad decision? What was the impact of the bad decision? And what is the impact on the legacy of the person who made the bad decision? I try to keep asking myself those questions and hopefully doing it in as nonpartisan a fashion as I could. I am a partisan. I'm a proud liberal Democrat. But if you're trying to write history, you want to write it as fairly as you can. Sure. I hope I did that. I don't know that I did. I did my best.
Well, you did a great job on it, as far as I'm concerned.
You're also prejudiced.
And that hurts to compliment you. So
I know it does.
But I just want to let you all know, Bob's on to other things. He's written another book that'll be published, I think, in the spring, right,
yes,
Bob?
A novel.
A novel. He has written a novel that I am so honored and proud to have had him ask me to edit it or to review it. And I was happy to do that till I found out it was 417 pages. But but I was glad to do it. I was honored to do it. I look forward to that coming out. And so one final item, and we could go on, as we often do, and as we often did as kids, we could go on forever. But one final item is your closeness to the Bai family is clear in my discussions with you, clear in your writings. It's just apparent. Last week, Birch Bai's grandson, Evan Bai's son, announced that he was going to run for Secretary of State of the state of Indiana. Your thoughts?
Well, first of all, what most people don't realize, his name is Birch Evans Bai IV. Evan By, real name is Birch Evans By the third. Senator By was junior. And Evan even said to me on the phone just a matter of weeks ago, "You're probably one of the only people besides me who knew all 4 generations of Birch Byes," because I knew Birch's father as well. And I was a pallbearer at his funeral. So to know his grandsons, obviously, that's important. I got to know Bo. I've gotten to spend some time with him. A fabulous human being, just enormously likable, smart. He served in the military. He graduated from Harvard. He is a lawyer. He's only 29 years old. He's got, I think, a great future in front of him. Hopefully, he can turn this into a winning opportunity for Secretary of State. I'm delighted he's doing it. I think he has very little to lose. He knows full well that his grandfather's political career was launched by him entering a race that everyone told him he couldn't win. Birch used to say, "I wasn't smart enough to know I couldn't win." And so I think Bo's got an opportunity to do this. He's a delightful human. He's a great-looking human. People who meet him like him. He's smart. He's the kind of person we want involved in politics, regardless of what your philosophy is. You want people who are committed to the process, who want to do the right things, who can appeal to the average voter. I think he offers all that, and I wish him well.
Yeah, I've had the good fortune to meet Bo. Actually spent some quality time with him about a week ago. Incredibly impressed. At sort of a deja vu, back in 1985, 84, 85, I had my first meeting with Evan By. I was fortunate enough to be part of a small group that put together his campaign for Secretary of State. About the same age. I think he was 29 or 30 at the time. I don't recall.
He was born in 55, so in 1988 he would have been, 33?
Yeah, 33, 32. Yeah, 88 as governor. But for Secretary of State, 31. He was younger. And we put that together. Several years later, he ran for governor. I was blessed to be part of that group that put it together for Northwest Indiana. I still think that my recollection when I was election board attorney is that he still holds the highest percentage of votes in Lake County that a statewide candidate has achieved. I was when Joe Donnelly ran for senator and told me when I was county chairman, I need these many votes. I need these many votes. We got him those many votes, and he was particularly happy. But it wasn't the percentage, and he was upset. Well, wait a minute. He says, "Come on now. Haven't got this." And I was like a percent or a percent and a half back. I said, "You didn't tell me you wanted the percentage. You just said the number of votes." So anyway, we could tell these kind of stories all day, folks. I am so grateful for Bob being here. So grateful that I could bring this story to you, especially those of you here in Lake County, here in Northwest Indiana.
Let me interject.
Yeah, go ahead.
It is so cool to see Wieser Podcast. So my oldest friend in the world is doing this. When you ran for county chairman, I think I asked you if you bumped your head or you lost your friggin' mind. But this man has been committed to the process, to making this community better. I am so proud of him. And the fact that he does his podcast and is doing this and invited me to do this with him is a great honor.
Well, it certainly is. The feeling is mutual, totally mutual. I've admired Bob and his ability to be creative since we were young kids, and he would choreograph the little plays that we would have down in his basement that usually involved, my recollection, Cisco and Pancho and some other stuff.
God, I remember magic shows.
Yeah, magic shows, the whole thing. This has just been truly so enjoyable to do. I hope to be bringing occasionally stories like this to all of you to know that that we all matter. We all of us. I don't care if you're raised in in Shaker Heights, Ohio, or on Long Island, New York, or you're raised in Hammond, Indiana, as we were, which is a great city and remains a great city. So you can do what you want to do when you put your mind to it. You can do it, and you can succeed. And fortunately, we've had people succeed in politics and government. Bob's the inaugural individual I was able to bring here to you. I hope to continue to do this. I'm grateful for, as always, to WJOB and to our brilliant producer Adriana for setting this all up. Thank everybody, and I look forward to our next podcast. You all have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks, Bob.